I'm John Billingsley, and you are listening to Beyond Track podcast.
What are some thoughts of yours towards the whole, is Star Trek getting too woke?
The idea that a show that exists to push the boundaries in terms of what is acceptable and what it should be like just part of our human condition, which is, everybody on the fucking ship, as long as you're nice. To me, it's like you can't be too woke.
Red alert.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Beyond Trek podcast. Today we have a very special session. In the house, I have the great John Billingsley. Thank you for being here tonight with us, John.
My pleasure. Thank you for the encomiums. I owe you $1.
Oh, okay. A founder of Trek the Vote for Fair Elections, but not from the Gamma Quadrant, Tae Phoenix. And of course, Renzo, my esteemed co-host. We're here today to do this special segment because California is facing a recall vote that pits Governor Gavin Newsom against about 40 players on the field. And some of those people who are the front runners for this position will not do California kindly. So I brought the 4 people I know to be the most outrageous speakers on politics into the same room so we can have
and let's cut right to the chase. Larry Elder has an 18-point lead over the second most likely person to be elected governor if Newsom is defeated. So we're not talking about this abstraction of these candidates. We're talking about one guy.
Yeah.
It's either going to be Governor Newsom or it's going to be Larry Elder. And I think we should talk about Larry Elder.
I have 5 quotes for you guys that I dug up from Larry Elder of things that he said, and I just want to get you guys' reactions on these. Some of these are pretty crazy, all right? First one, this is the interviewer asking, you're on record calling for the end of the minimum wage, saying, quote, the minimum wage ought to be $0. How do you think California voters currently earning the minimum wage, which is $13 to $14 an hour, would react to that? Elder's response. Well, given the indoctrination people have about the minimum wage, they would probably not react well to that. You think, buddy, he wants no minimum wage in a state like California. I wonder how that would work out for those tech workers and for
not only does he not want a minimum wage, but he does not want any kind of a social safety net either.
Nothing.
He doesn't want expanded unemployment insurance. He would be anti-food stamps. I mean, this
sink or
is
swim.
Healthcare.
This is a guy, I'm backing up because this is enraging. The whole process is enraging. And I think it's really important for those people who may not be familiar with California politics to know that the reason we have an initiative process, a recall process, et cetera, in the first place is because towards the end of the 19th and the early part of the 20th century, this was a completely corrupt state in the pocket of oligarchs. So this was the only way that citizens might have a chance to actually get their voices heard. It was 100+ years ago. This structure now has completely flip-flopped. We actually have a very representative state government, and it's the initiative process that is fundamentally corrupt. This has been put on the ballot, and many of the initiatives that now unfortunately kind of screw our state, Prop 13 most notably, have been put on the ballot by large moneyed interests. So the process itself, as far as I'm concerned, stinks to the high heavens.
John, can you remind the audience what Prop 13 is?
Yeah, Prop 13 back in the 70s, a gentleman named Howard Jarvis, although he wasn't the only guy responsible for this, essentially said, hey, property taxes are too high and it's forcing people out of their houses. And that was true. But as is often the case with these initiatives, instead of using a scalpel, an initiative uses a cleaver. So they put a cap, in essence, on the amount property tax could go up, not only on individual domiciles, but on businesses as well. So it's one thing for me as a homeowner to effectively say my property tax is only going to go up in small degrees. It's quite another for Disney Studios to have the same effective cap. So what it effectively did was dramatically reduce our ability to get our tax base up based on large businesses paying their fair share. And the burden in California, the tax burden, largely falls on individuals as opposed to businesses. That's one of the most, I think, pernicious aspects of this initiative process. And it's really hard to overturn initiatives.
Pernicious
it's a very
is the
good
perfect word.
it's a very succinct summary of Prop 13 too. Like that was a great summary for it. I mean, and the actual process to get a recall election is you get 12% of signatories from the previous election. You submit them, the counties all review them, they knock out whatever numbers they can, and then they go forward for recall elections. All they need to do is get 50% in this election of people saying no, they want to replace Gavin Newsom, and then whoever has the most, doesn't matter how many that may be, becomes the next governor from the list of candidates, right? The person could be elected with 10,000 votes.
Yeah, and I imagine we're speaking to the converted. So this is probably more about for those folks who are listening. The 14th is the deadline. Vote. I think we could talk till the cows come home about the reasons we consider Larry Elder and various other candidates to be problematic, and we certainly can and should do that. But I'm going to start by saying, if you are already in agreement, don't even listen to us. Just go and get your vote in now. Do that right now. Put it in the mail. Take it to the ballot box. Take it to one of the drop boxes.
And tell your friends to vote. Make sure that the people in your lives are voting.
Yeah. I mean, I want to say this in a way that doesn't give anybody a sense of false confidence. I think it's really important to note that a few months back, the polls were suggesting that Newsom was going to lose. I think one of the key and smart things the Newsom campaign did was they actually said to Democrats, don't put yourself on this ballot. This is a choice between right-wing lunacy and progressive governance. Look at who you're putting in office instead of me. And he made this the case about here's who Larry Elder is. And it was a smart thing to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in contrast to what happened the last time California was in this position, which I was living in California at the time, I remember this pretty clearly, that like, yeah, exactly. And because he put himself in competition for Democrat votes with Gray Davis, and then you have this guy with all the name recognition in the world coming in, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and so like that was the perfect storm. I fingers crossed, I'm hoping that this is not because of those factors, right? One, we don't have another Democrat in this race, and two, because thank God Larry Elder is not Arnold Schwarzenegger, we may be able to pull out of this, but it's scary nevertheless.
It is scary nevertheless. It's scary that it's happening at all. It's reflective of a fundamental, unfortunately, drift on the Republican Party's part towards anti-democratic processes and practices all over the country. I mean, they don't really give a damn about anything except winning, period. And to hear already, which it just enrages me, this, like, the only reason we could possibly lose if it's a cheat. We're getting cheat.
In a state with a 22 million advantage voter number for, like, Democrats? Really?
Yeah. Well, and Donald Trump is right out there in front of it.
Of course.
Like he is, and frankly, I mean, let's just, from a national perspective, he is behaving, in an unprecedented fashion for a former president, which doesn't surprise me, of course. He did everything in an unprecedented fashion. But for him to be weighing in on a California election is beyond inappropriate. And if this were normal times, everyone would just be shaking their heads. The fact that this is just whatever, that's Donald Trump is,
fascistic action number 7,000.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. How far we have fallen.
And one really important thing, which I even if it isn't Elder, even if it's Kevin Faulconer, who is way behind. So
San Diego.
Any Republican has one power. Should Dianne Feinstein, who is 88 years old, should Dianne Feinstein slip on the ice? Should she become, incapacitated? Should she have to step down? The governor of California has the ability to appoint somebody to that office. It's going to be a Republican, and that means we've lost the Senate.
And Larry Elder has said it will be a Republican. Like, that's not speculation.
It's in my list of quotes, even.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I want to hear the quote, and then Tae, I have a focused question for you in regards to fair elections. So Renzo?
Okay.
So the quote about Dianne Feinstein is, and God forbid Governor Elder should replace Dianne Feinstein, that nobody has seen in weeks, and I'm told she's in worse mental condition than Joe Biden. They're afraid I'm going to replace her with a Republican, which I most certainly would do, and that would be an earthquake in Washington, D.C. He's told us his game plan, told us why he wants to do it. Now we just got to stop
He
him.
also said on the Department of Education front, I want somebody on the Board of Education like Betsy DeVos. He said if I can appoint people to the California Supreme Court, I'd want somebody in the mode of Antonin Scalia. I'd want an originalist. I mean, this guy is arguably to the right of Donald Trump.
Oh, I don't think there's much argument there. I'm pretty sure he's consistently further right. He's just consistent about it. Donald Trump was a bellwether. He would shift with the wind, right?
When it came to that agenda, the 45th president, Donald Trump, was a foot in the door for all of this nonsense to squeeze by. And what the implications of his selection there are is if he puts a Republican in the Senate, should anything happen to Senator Feinstein, that tips the balance 51-49 in favor of this conservative agenda. And that, based on a ton of bills that are being passed nationwide, it
kills reconciliation.
It kills reconciliation. But to Tae...
It probably ends the Biden agenda.
To Tae, how does that impact voting rights nationwide, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on?
I mean... how does just let me make sure I get the question straight. How does a Republican takeover of California and hence the United States Senate impact voting rights nationwide?
Yes.
Is that's the question? I mean, it's catastrophic.
It's the spirit.
We can barely even get conversation going about the For the People Act now, and that's with massive pressure. From across the country, ongoing protest on a regular basis. If Mitch McConnell was in charge of the Senate again, forget it. We wouldn't. I mean, it would go down in flames. And that's the truly frustrating and terrifying thing about the whole situation in this country is everything is just one slip on the ice, to your point, John, away from crumbling. And it's been like that for a while, and we keep just kind of barely hanging on by our fingernails. But we're this is if that.
I mean, what's the quote for that? Freedom is a fragile thing. It's never more than one generation away from extinction, right? Yep. We're right at the precipice there. We have options and we have battles we need to fight.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jean-Luc Picard had something to say about that too. Constant vigilance. It was the episode "The Drumhead," right? Where it's like the price we pay for for our freedom is constant vigilance against these kinds of anti-democratic behaviors.
Yeah. And to take it back to California, I mean, because I've heard some people, and I really always want to kind of try and rebut this, say that, well, how much damage could he do? We have a Democratic supermajority, and he would probably only be in office for a year because the likelihood he's be voted out next November. Above and beyond the things we've already talked about, his ability to appoint people in very strong and critical, important bureaucracies across our state, environmental boards specifically, I think, he could do much, much long-range damage. When you think about what's happening right now on the national level, Trump did so much damage with all of the various departments and all of the bureaucracies by stripping them of decent leadership, people resigning right, left, and center because they didn't want to work under lunatics. That's so much of the repair work we are seeing is happening behind the scenes. We're not aware of the damage that was done. There was reading the other day something about oh God, I'm spacing on his name. The brain surgeon that was made a.
Oh yeah, I know who you're talking about. Former
HHS secretary.
Yeah.
That department has just been emptied out, and there's there's simply any kind of fair housing work that we can possibly do right now. It's like we don't have the personnel.
Yeah, Ben Carson, I think was the name.
Yeah, Ben Carson.
Ben Carson. It's hard to keep all the horrible.
There have been a million think pieces about how the State Department was hollowed out after 4 years of Trump because people just kept leaving. Nobody wanted to say. Same thing for the EPA, the FDA, etc. And all of these departments matter, especially now.
Yeah, and that could happen in California. I mean, I think
the other thing that I think we need to just address is the humanitarian impact, right? That yes, he could be voted out and policies could be reversed, but the people who lose their housing, lose their health care, kids that don't get an education that year, the ripple effects of those kinds of things, the impact that has is not reversible.
And first and foremost, he's an anti-vaxxer and an anti-masker. I mean,
I've got the quote for that too.
Yeah, let's hear that quote.
Sure. By the way, or no, it's I'm going to follow the science. I'm going to. I don't believe the science suggests that young people should be vaccinated. I don't believe the science suggests young people should have to wear masks at school. I'm not sure the science has settled on it at all. I wouldn't wear a mask.
Weird how the belief is preempting the science there.
Right. Yeah, he's put his positions out there very plainly, right? He has made his straw man real for us. He's told us the things that we need to argue against, right? Like, and the things he's telling us are scary. He doesn't believe in mask mandates. He doesn't believe in the vaccine mandates. He opposes rational governments in that sense, right? He thinks that government should be staying into women's wombs rather than staying into keeping people safe from a pandemic, right? Like he's no friend to women at all, right? Like he's got this quote that I found too that was like, this is a bad one. When you look at all those women who have marched, something like 2 million women, Donald Trump has probably gotten more obese women off the couch and in the streets working out than Michelle Obama did in 8 years.
Yeah.
He's a monster.
He doesn't care.
That's
thoughtless and cruel.
It's interesting to he reminds me a lot of white women who are so invested in proximity to white male power that they will just throw everyone else under the bus. And the virulent racism of those white women is just, you can just smell it.
I mean, you heard his Candace Owens conversation, right?
Yeah.
Did you hear that one, John?
Yeah.
I didn't.
Oh, okay. Well, so they were discussing the concept of reparations and how the UK was better than us about it. So here's the long quote for it. By the way, when you mentioned the UK was ahead of us, they were. Did you know that the slave owners were compensated? After they lost their property, the government compensated slave owners. Yeah. And so when people here want to talk about reparations, do they really want to have that conversation? Because like it or not, slavery was legal. And so their legal property was taken away from them after the Civil War. So you could make an argument that the people that are owed reparations are not only just black people, but also the people whose property was taken away after the end of the Civil War. The man is literally arguing that we need to consider whether we should give back plantation owners money for the property that they lost.
And this is the problem with infotainment folks running for public office. Mm-hmm. I have no doubt that probably his interest in saying that was to rile folks up and get rhetorical mud fight going because he was a radio shock jock.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's baked into his DNA. Governance as a form of mudflinging is baked into the DNA of Larry Elder, and we've seen what that is like with 4 years of Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
We
and also don't
boring governments, right?
Don't underestimate also the ways in which that ingratiates him to the power structure as well. There is a degree of that going on where people who have been disempowered will sometimes align themselves with the oppressor in order to curry that favor for themselves and throw everyone else under the bus. And I wouldn't be that would not surprise me.
Yeah, I mean, and the long-term project for the Republican Party has to deride and diminish governance and competence and professionalism under the rubric of elitism, so as to create a situation in which bad service, it works. It's a wonderful trick. When they're in office, they can say, well, governance is bad anyway, so we're not, don't blame us. Governance is bad. We can't give you anything. Governance is bad.
Take it a step further than that, right? Even then, when they're not in office, they can point at the previous administration and be like, look how bad government is. When we were in power, we couldn't do anything. Look how bad government is.
Yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful way of making sure that people in an underclass stay in a perpetual underclass.
It's gaslighting is what it is. It is absolutely gaslighting. It's saying, you don't see what you see, you don't hear what you hear. And, we're going to just not give you anything and then tell you that we can't give you anything because government is bad. Like it is a mind game.
For what it's worth, and maybe you guys are tracking this a little bit better than I am, but, my understanding of the nature of the way the ballots are breaking is that there are still populations in California that are undervoting and other populations that are overvoting. So we are getting a stronger Democratic turnout, but we are still not getting a tremendously strong turnout in the Latino community or in the African American community. So I would also encourage people, if they're listening to this, if relationships are held in those communities, those are votes that we really want to get. That's our base. And our base has and for obvious reasons. I mean, we're talking to a great extent about a portion of a population that is barely getting by. They're not going to be as plugged in to the blah 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 of politics, even in a non-off year election. This is a special election and a bizarre one. It takes a certain amount of outreach to try and encourage people, I think, who aren't politically incredibly attuned, to participate. That's where I kind of feel like if people can help.
So
nobody's saying go and hound your friends who are in the African American community or the Hispanic community or the Latinx community, but this is definitely a time to remind them that Larry Elder, though he may be a 7-year-old African American, is no friend to the Black community at large, right? Like, his views do not further the needs of those communities, and you can look at his own words to back that up.
Yeah, I think there was an article in the LA Times either today or yesterday, in which they visited his nominal birthplace and talked to a number of people in the community, and he's not supported.
So to try and incentivize any listeners who are sitting there going, okay, you told me to tell my friends to vote, but like, what's in it for me? What's in it for them? I want to touch on some of the things that Newsom has done for California, especially in the last couple of years. Feel free to comment. I don't even mind if you interrupt me because y'all are cool. So the biggest thing, I'm gonna start with that. The biggest thing is that Newsom authorized $100 billion stimulus to low-income California during the COVID pandemic. The argument, of course, could always be it should be more because people are struggling and suffering and unemployment, all those bad things, and I don't disagree with those arguments. But it's
Larry Elder isn't going to get you closer.
That's exactly the point. Governor Newsom allocated $100 billion. It wasn't great. Larry Elder doesn't want you to have a minimum wage. He doesn't care. And that makes me wonder, just as a side note, any of the departments, if he becomes governor, any of those departments that we currently pay taxes for, if those get shut down, do our taxes go down, or do they just keep going to another grifting laundry mat or something like that?
He wants Betsy DeVos to be the Secretary of Education. I'm sure she'll find a way to buy a new yacht.
Oh, yes. No question.
She needs a fourth one, right? Other things. For low-wage workers, whether you are the kid working through school, if you're the retiree with a part-time job, or a single parent putting in your 40-plus hours a week to make a living, the earned income credit, which is a California tax credit, has doubled for those people. So that means that you get to claim a little bit more on your taxes, and if you have a refund, you'll get some back, and if you owe, you'll owe less. Those are the two big things that have happened very recently. He's closing 2 prisons because the California prison population is just going down. There's no reason to spend this money with this facility if that money can be diverted, say, to more low-wage support. Especially, again, we're not out of COVID. The Delta variant is rearing its ugly head, and the longer that sticks around, the more help that we're going to need, and we're not going to get it from one of the candidates. He also halted statewide executions.
Big fan of that.
And I venture to say boldly that is a very pro-life move.
Very much so. And I can imagine that Catholic voters in the state of California should be thinking about that in particular.
Right. So if you're listening and you've heard any of those points and you think those points would resonate with your friends, your family, people who are undecided, or even maybe those who are going Larry Elder, tell them you heard from us.
I just want to come back again and say that, he is not suggesting a vaccine mandate across the state, but he is saying teachers need to be vaccinated. Healthcare workers need to be vaccinated. People who are in positions of grave responsibility in our state need to be vaccinated. That goes away with Larry Elder.
Right.
And if we look at what's happening in Florida or a number of other states where teachers are not vaccinated and kids are not asked to wear masks in school, well, 13 teachers died in Florida
in a week.
Yeah.
In a week. Yeah.
In a week.
I mean, this is one thing that really I find incredibly frustrating. The idea that it's a zero-sum game. It's either you follow the science and you're careful, or you have a healthy economy. The reality is, if we have another Delta spike, California's economy is going to take them the nuts.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think if nothing else, healthy self-interest would say, let's stay safe. Let's continue to get better. Let's get the vaccination rate up. Let's wear masks indoors. I'm sorry about the French laundry thing. That was a fuck up.
No, it was.
Yeah,
Absolutely
it was.
a fuck
People
up.
are
He said as much.
Yeah, if people are human. That is one goddamn fuck up. But set against a policy of following the science from day one, to my mind, it's a no-brainer. I want a sophisticated, mature adult who understands that lives are on the line.
Yeah.
And also a sophisticated, mature adult who can admit when he screws up.
Yeah.
Which is a thing that a lot of these anti-government people just don't have the capacity to go, that was a mistake, I did that wrong.
Right.
Like, I want that in a leader. Because everyone is a human being, and we all screw up. The ability to say, I did that wrong, is a leadership quality.
It is.
Yeah, and in terms of what it was, it signified something. It was a fuck up of a lesser order to me. Politically, it was maladroit, but what it actually meant, it's nowhere near the level of fuck up or sin that you look at some of these southern governors, where they are effectively dooming people for their own political benefit, effectively making it difficult for people to get over cover. I mean, that's what they're doing. It's sin.
Yeah. And anybody who knows or loves someone in one of those states, especially someone who works with the public, is we're all wringing our hands every day about that.
Yeah, it's incredibly painful.
Yeah, I want to just make another point about the federal impact of losing Governor Newsom. And I don't know if it's okay for me to talk about it, but I'm going to bring it up because it's probably okay. But Roe v. Wade. Joe Biden said that if Roe v. Wade gets shot down, then we make it the law of the land. He said that at a town hall almost a year ago. And if that critical senator majority shifts the other direction, we then will never see that. Roe v. Wade can be overturned, and the Senate will never pass legislation supporting a woman's right to choose or the right to privacy that was invoked by Roe v. Wade.
Just think, do you think Mitch McConnell is going to put forward or pass along anything that involves protecting a woman's right to choose? Not so likely. And if we don't have Dianne Feinstein as a member of the Senate or a Democratic replacement for her, were she to pass,
right,
then that's what happens. Mitch McConnell gets what he wants.
She doesn't even need to pass. She can
she could retire.
She could just pull a retirement.
True.
Yeah, and the value of California right now as the fifth largest economy in the world, and as a governmental entity that is able to speak truth to power, is we have to be leaning forward. If we are going to fight a retrograde battle amongst ourselves for the next year and a half, if we're going to be mired in a form of California civil war because we've elected a lunatic, we have lost our capacity as a state to lead the battle against the forces of reactionaryism.
And let's look at some of the things that California has done in that sense, right? California pulled the rest of the country forward on green standards for car emissions, right? They pulled Detroit kicking and screaming into it, and they've managed to do it. It's now essentially the law of the land since the Obama era. Trump rescinded a bunch of it, but even that got tied up in court by California's lawyers, right? Like, California has been saving the United States from a lot of its own mistakes for decades at this point.
Yeah. I also think I'd like to talk about, which is something that kind of in a way is maybe a little off topic, but one of the big issues that drives people's upset and frustration is homelessness. And it's an awfully tricky thing to talk about because people so desperately want a silver bullet solution. And to me, it's incredibly facile for people to think that any politician has a solution to homelessness when so many things contribute to this problem, from a school system where 40 kids are in a class and you graduate people who aren't able to participate in an economy. They aren't even able to come into an economy with the skills to earn the minimum wage, where you don't have the housing stock, where you have mental health issues, where you have desperately in need of prison reform. There is no individual on this planet, if you put them in the job of governor, who's going to be able to solve homelessness. And
homelessness has been a problem since prehistory, right? Like there have always been people who have been without and had to rely on the grace of others, right? Like that's essentially what we're seeing here. And they should be able to survive with dignity. If you're going to force them to go through the sort of humiliations that Elder wants people to go through before they get public assistance, it's life without even dignity, and that's just not it's not appropriate.
And he wants to cut public assistance at the same time. Right. I mean, ultimately they have no effective solution. I think if you look at what they are suggesting, for instance, they would want to say, this is actually Cox, who says people have to get mental health treatment and drug rehabilitation counseling before they can be housed.
The barriers are in reverse, right? You can't nobody wants to go through heroin detox on the streets. Let's be clear, no one wants to go through heroin detox at all.
Right. But and it's not deliverable on the street.
Exactly. It's not deliverable on the street. You can't, I mean, and this is the other thing, is mental health, the way our mental health system, and I've spent a lot of time in our mental health system. The way that our mental health system is set up is that you put everything is on the individual. So you come in and you say, I'm having these anxiety symptoms, or I'm having suicidal thoughts. And it's all about, well, what's wrong with you? How do we fix your thinking? How do we medicate this away? And meanwhile, you're dealing with racism, rape culture, all of the forces and factors out in the world that make people, that put people in this position of having these feelings and these experiences. And so to dial that up all the way to living in a tent under a bridge, of course you're gonna be struggling with your mental health. There's nobody who's in that situation who isn't. And also the drug treatment issue, people who are living homeless, most of them, 70% of people who are living on the streets right now, who are chemically dependent, became chemically dependent after they lost their housing, because it was a coping mechanism for dealing with the absolute dehumanization and degradation of living in the streets. I could go on and on about this forever, but that's the meat of it.
No, it's important. Thank you.
That's great.
Yeah, and I bring it up in part because I think one of the things that's frustrating, as I'm sure it's frustrating to many of us, is that the natural human inclination to want to blame an individual for intractable societal problems leads us to want to take the guy at the helm and toss him aside because they didn't fix the thing we want fixed. Homelessness, drought, fires, a lot of the things that are scaring all of us, they are national problems, and they have to be dealt with on a national scale, and that requires an aggressive progressive movement. It is a retrograde action to remove a progressive leader from the head of the world's fifth largest economy and America's largest state because you're upset about things that can only be dealt with through national leadership.
Right.
John, can I ask you something? Have you ever thought about running for office?
There are many reasons why I could not run for office. I have a checkered past.
Okay. Well.
And I and you know what? I'm far too likely to use a 4-letter word in a casual conversation.
That would get you elected. I'm sorry.
That would probably get you elected.
I'm an atheist.
Also, don't underestimate the Trekkie vote either. Like, just saying.
John, I'm right there with you, though.
Here's the other thing: is that if one were to run for office, one would need to run. I'm a progressive. I'm a leftist. I would run in a leftist district. There is already a leftist in the district in which I would be running. Yeah. And they probably have spent years in the trenches, whereas I haven't. So I appreciate that, but I sometimes think one of the things that strikes me as perverse is that we are always looking for that silver bullet by way of an outsider too, is what gets us Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I'm not a, right. I believe in people who've devoted their lives to understanding how to pull levers in the political realm.
Right.
I want those people.
I trust those people because they're in that thing. And one, like, I'm over here and I'm debating between the two messages that we have been seeing, and I'm trying to distill them down into something that's obvious that anybody on the street could listen to and go, no, this is this. And so when it comes to leadership from the both sides of leadership so far. We had 4 years of somebody saying, I'm going to fix everybody and everything, and anything that I can't fix, that's this person's fault. That's one side of the message.
Only I can fix things.
Right.
Yes. Message
Yes.
all the
so
time.
that's one side of messaging. We're not going to name names. It's one side of messaging. And if you feel offended by that, you know who I'm talking about. The other side of the messaging is, I can't fix everything, but I know the people who can, and I trust these people, and I'm giving these people a platform to give us the advice and the knowledge and the wisdom, and I'm going to be funneling resources to those people to help you out. So these are the two sides of messaging. And we have to be very careful to hear that. And it's never going to be that obvious. It's going to be pretty silken words that get dolled up to make people feel better on both sides.
When you think of the vast amount of money that has gone into this recall and the vast amount of energy, how that energy could have been spent to make this a better state and a better world. If all of those people had chosen to identify a not-for-profit in their community that they wanted to give themselves over to help address an issue, we would have been so much better off. This is such a wasteful. I mean, how many million?
$278 million.
Yeah,
Sorry.
think about
and that's
that.
on purpose. That's on purpose. That is part of what the reactionaries do. They grind you down. They make you exhausted. They steal your resources. Everything. We're dealing with this in Seattle right now. Shama Sawant is the nation's first socialist city council member, and she's in the middle. They're trying to recall her, and it's got progressive Seattle just spinning our wheels trying to fight this thing instead of doing what we would need to be doing to move the ball forward on, for example, addressing the homelessness crisis here. So there is a lot of that. It is a tactic to make you defend what you have gained and earned rather than gaining more ground.
That's the thing. Their pockets are deeper than ours, right? Like the right in this country is almost always aligned with big business, right? Which means that they have more resources from which to draw from. This is not to say that there aren't corporatist Democrats.
Hooray! My power went out.
I mean, we all go through this. I always kind of liken it to like being on a tug of war line. It's like the tug of war never ends. It never has ended. It never will end. And everybody needs to take a break from the rope. You can't be on the rope every second of every hour of every day. But the fear, of course, I think that we all have a little bit as progressives is that Biden won, Trump is out. Whoosh, relax. Well, this is a harbinger of next year. There's going to be a lot at stake in next year's election cycle. And for everybody who's listening, if there's any upping of the game that you can consider doing, prepare, because next year it's all, it's if we lose the House, if we lose the Senate, if we are again mired in another 3 years of not being able to get anything done, then 3 years from now, the mantra is going to be, see, Biden couldn't accomplish anything. Vote for a Republican. Oh, and here's Donald Trump again.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and let's even take a step further, nearer to today and talk about the voting rights fight. Because if we cannot enshrine voting rights, I mean, they completely gutted the Voting Rights Act. Yeah. We have fewer voting rights today than we did in 1955.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, I mean, I'm very pessimistic about our ability when I look at the behavior of Manchin and Sinema, et cetera. I mean, it seems to me it's going to take getting rid of the
filibuster. Yeah.
I don't see that happening. I think I just don't. I mean,
I understand it is absolutely an uphill battle. It's still one we must fight.
Oh, we must fight.
We have to fight it.
I think we also have to recognize that the other fight is that voter registration. If they are going to cheat and make the rules ever more difficult, it doesn't mean that we can't lay back and say they've cheated. We quit. As horrible as it is to be,
of course not.
Yeah, that's the worst thing about being progressives is the cheaters change the rules and we still can't quit the table. It's one of the things that aggravates me the most, and particularly consider the African American experience going back for continually to stand up and say I'm still going to participate, even as you're fucking bilking me again and again and again. The moral courage that takes, and that's what's required.
I'm also going to squeak in a small other election that's going on right now. The Virginia statewide elections are going on this year. Virginia does their elections off cycles. So if you live in Virginia and listen to the pod, remember, go vote. Our early voting starts in, I think, 12 days. So definitely take advantage of that opportunity too.
Yeah, he's a stealth candidate. What's his name?
Harry McAuliffe?
Yeah. The Republican.
He's kind of another crackpot.
Well, yeah, but he's doing an artful job at pretending that he isn't as far right as he is by keeping the conversation focused on, a few issues.
Yeah, see, that's the thing, right? Like, we keep looking at like California's COVID numbers are this high or that bad or this comparison, right? It's like, if you look at them compared to another polity that has roughly the same population, they're really not that bad. So I did this myself, right? I just grabbed the numbers for Poland, which has the same population, roughly the same urbanization as California. The economies are a little different, fine, but the number of deaths that California had are much lower by like almost a fourth versus Poland. And Polish people can get access to the same medicines that we can because they're part of the EU, right? And yet they handled COVID far worse than California did. And they both got 38 million people, right? Like, we can compare these things. These aren't in the abstract. These are realistic things we can look at.
There's no, undoubtedly. I mean, you if you look at blue state versus red state performance,
of course.
I mean, come on, But unfortunately, we live in a world in which people would rather be dead than wrong.
That's a weird world to live in.
You just said a mouthful there.
Yeah.
That is so sad.
Doesn't it sound a little dystopian too?
Well, it's human.
Yeah.
I mean, you go back to day one and people sacrifice their lives for causes, and years go by and you think they did what for that? Thus, it has always been. It's one of the sad things about the human condition. I mean, when push comes to shove, I will stick up for my tribe, even if I'm going to die doing it. And Trump's great gift and the Republican Party's great skill has been to divide us along deeply tribal lines.
Yeah.
I thought Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T, wrote a great book called The Righteous Mind that kind of talked about this. I thought it was very astute in the way it kind of argued that the tribal differences have been with us forever, and they're divided in very clear ways, and savvy politicians are very good at putting their finger right on the beating pulse of what tears them.
Well, they have think tanks and all kinds of big data analysts feeding them what to say, what to do. I feel like it's coordinated all over social media. You can see whenever there's a big break in something, 500,000 accounts will drop the very same memo. It's like everybody who runs those accounts got a text message that said, do this now. And that account just blows up with...
Here's the talking point for the weekend.
And I know we're off message.
I mean, the whole thing over critical race theory, I mean, just that blow up of that term specifically was completely driven by that machine.
This guy's argument, which I thought was very interesting, was that if you look at one tribe that fundamentally argued from time immemorial that the best way to preserve the tribe was to gather together and fight outsiders, and the other tribe's way of surviving was to say, include, grow, expand, we'll get swallowed if we don't. And that those two animating impulses have divided us from day one. That it's a form of anthropological, it's like the lizard brain.
Yeah.
I really can see that still in the way in which our polity breaks in two.
I think you also, the other piece of it is that I think people feel a lot of shame. We don't have a lot of capacity to admit that we're wrong in this culture because of our inability to deal with shame. One of the reasons why Brene Brown's work is so important is because, she's teaching people this basic skill of how to deal with when you're wrong and when you're on the wrong side of something. But a lot of folks haven't gotten the memo yet. And when I was earlier talking about like a leadership quality is being able to say, I fucked that up, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That is in a nutshell, it's being able to do that same thing. People would rather be dead than wrong. You want people in a position of power who don't feel that way and who have that capacity.
Yeah. I suck at this. This is another reason, just to be honest, that I would never run for office, because MJ Hagar, who I thought was a terrific candidate, was very astute in her ability to say nobody ever wants to be told they're wrong. Nobody ever wants to be made to feel like they're a dumbass. And if you go into any kind of conversation, I mean, we're probably doing it now. We're making a lot of assumptions about everybody who's listening to us. it's a really hard thing to do, particularly when we're all so angry about what we perceive to be, going on in our culture. I have a hard time with that. I'm not great at it. I can do it on a one-to-one basis at a bar stool. I travel around as an actor, and if I'm someplace sitting next to somebody, I can keep the temperature down while we argue. But forums like this and events where people stand on a stage and talk, I'd be a terrible candidate because I'm more inclined to go,
wait, what are you inclined to do again? Yeah.
I think we can quote you on that.
Listen, I'm right there with you, John.
How do you transcribe that sound?
That's a problem for the YouTube algorithm, not for us.
Yeah.
But no, I'm right there with you, John. I did debate, I did Model UN. Trust me, getting into arguments is something I deeply enjoy, right? And I still do it on Facebook because I'm a masochist, right? But I understand that sometimes there are some arguments that are just not worth continuing with. Like, this is going nowhere, right? Like, I'm not talking to you, I'm talking at you, and you're not talking to me, you're talking at me. So let's just cut it here, right? Like, let's cut our losses. Yeah. And I think that that's something that some politicians understand, and they can walk away from things, and others can't. Like, I can't imagine in my heart of hearts Donald Trump saying, I'm wrong, never mind, this isn't worth talking about. He's just going to keep going, right? I have the same thing with Larry Elder. I can't imagine the guy going, never mind, this isn't worth arguing about, let's just talk about something else. I can't imagine it.
Let alone actually adopting the alternate perspective, just even as like a thought experiment.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's rough. So outside of getting out and voting, and hopefully voting for the candidate that's looking to help instead of hinder, what are some other ways that we can, inspire people to be a bit more active?
Well, so there are, in terms of the California recall specifically, there's lots of phone banking going on. So for those of you who don't live in the state of California and you're listening to this and going, you want to help, like, there's plenty of opportunities to pick up the phone and call California voters and make sure they've got their ballots in. But in terms of like the broader, getting activated, I think it's that whole many hands make light work thing is really key right now. We can't say, okay, Donald Trump's out of the White House, the threat is passed, we're okay now, and take our feet off the gas pedal. We have to keep engaging, and it can't fall to the same people who, spent the 4 years of Trump's presidency going absolutely all out past the point of any rational capacity to to travel, go without rest, which I was in that position. It can't fall to us. It has to be a bigger group project. And so if you feel that you have a little bit of an additional cycle to spend on anything in particular, there are so many different amazing groups that are doing, you can go check out what the Center for Popular Democracy is up to, go have a look at Common Cause. Like, there are some really fantastic groups that even in these off years, when it's not, front and center in the headlines, they are doing the nuts and bolts work of making sure that we have
You can also fund
democracy.
You can also fundraise, which is one of the things. There are people who are good at making phone calls, and there are people who are good at knocking on doors. There are other people who are good at throwing parties. And if you got pals, you can throw a bash. And I grant you that in the COVID world, that might be a little trickier. But there are ways that you can identify a cause or an individual that you would like to support. To your point earlier, yes, the right wing will always be able to poke their hands into deeper pockets. But one of the right-wing successes is that they're also have historically been able to activate small donors more consistently. Some of what, to me, changed for the Democratic Party is that after Trump was elected, we learned that the importance of small donors and activating small donors and getting donations to come into people who were running for smaller offices all over the country was critical. Finding somebody for whom a small amount of money might make a significant difference, maybe somebody who's running for a state seat in Iowa that might help change the composition of the Iowa legislature. A little bit of money goes a long way in some of these smaller races. Throw a house party.
Listen,
or
Democrats
in
have
some
always
cases
been...
to
Go ahead.
in some cases too, candidates who are challenging more establishment Democrats from the left. In my district, our congressman is Adam Smith, and he's actually the chair of the Armed Services Committee. And he's a pretty middle of the road Democrat. You can count on him to vote the right way on many things, but he's never gonna go out there and start the revolution. There's a young woman running against him in a primary. Her name is Stephanie Agardo, and she is amazing. She could set the world on fire. She's like squad material, and I just want to see her get in there. And so it's like, find those candidates that are gonna shake things up.
I'm a 100 flowers bloom guy when it comes to the Democratic Party, and recognize the Democratic coalition needs to grow, and it needs to be, it needs to AOC and somebody who is to the right of me in the Democratic Party. We still need to stay under that tent together, because we have the narrowest fucking majority, and in states all over the country we're getting our asses kicked.
That's what I was going to say.
So I would say, if you're a Democrat, follow your heart, and whether you bend towards a candidate who is more to the left or more to the center, depending upon the race, depending upon your evaluation of the contours of that race, I think it is important that everybody recognize that doing what they can do to support candidates in whatever way that means. I'm a sucky phone banker. I've always sucked at it, in part because I get heated up. And and I found that I was pretty bad when it came to registering voters. I was good at throwing parties, and I was good at raising money, and I didn't realize I was good at it until I started doing it. And I found that one thing I always liked to do at the end of a party was to say, how many people would like to throw a cocktail party of their own? Raise their hand. We went around and we took names, and we just had a couple of people who followed up. And we asked everybody who threw a cocktail party to, at their cocktail party, do the same thing at the end.
Do the same thing.
So it's like, it metastasizes giving back.
Beautifully.
Yeah.
And people who come to those events, they learn more about how to get involved themselves in the political process, because they meet a candidate. Some of them, for the first time in their lives, if you can get a candidate to come to your event, are actually meeting somebody who's running for office. That can animate people. That's one way I think that people might think about getting involved.
Yeah. There's definitely
the point you were making, though, about Democrats wanting to get more involved in state house races is so important too, right? Like, the Democratic Party has a problem with winning state houses, right? There's like a structural problem with Democrats, which are a party that primarily focuses on cities winning in state houses. That's like a structural issue. We know that that's a thing. That it's well understood, right?
And the game is,
but it's not yeah, absolutely. But it's not an excuse to stop trying, right? We shouldn't stop trying. We can still win things. Virginia, which was the heart of the Confederacy, Richmond was the capital of the Confederacy, is now a blue trifecta state, right? Like, we can pick these states up and we can win them.
Well, and I think it's also really important, forgive the phone in the background, I think it's also really important to recognize that one of the problems the Democrats had for many years is they didn't have a deep bench. If you don't run for office, you don't learn how to run for office. So it's okay to run and lose. If you'll learn whether this is for you, and you'll get better at it.
Yeah. Eugene V. Debs got closer to winning every time he ran.
Stacey Abrams. I mean, I mean, great people emerge from the process of doing this. I do think it's really important for us to recognize that, yes, again, we've been cheated to a great extent. The nature of how redistricting works allows Republicans to create safe districts in which a Democrat cannot win. But you have to compete anyway. You still have to compete. And every dog catcher, who becomes a city councilman, who becomes a congressman, who might become a senator.
Or woman.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, very true.
Or person.
Isn't that basically Nancy Pelosi's story too?
Yeah. John, I just want to say too, anybody out there who's listening who decides they want to throw a cocktail party for a candidate, you can come hit me up on my website. I'll play music at your party.
Fabulous. I want to throw one other thing out, which is, because not everybody, I think it's really important when it comes to activism to not try and push a square peg into a round hole. There are people who, much as one might wish them to be overtly political, for them, political action means getting involved in a cause. And that could be teaching kids to read. It could be working on environmental issues. It could be working, volunteering for an organization that fights for immigrants' rights. It's all political. There are lots of ways in. I think a lot of it is to me, if you're trying to ask yourself this existential question, what can I do in my community to make it a better place? Is to challenge yourself to really get clearer and clearer about what your volunteer bliss is, because everybody's bliss is a little different. I think a lot of people don't necessarily ask themselves bliss-centric questions. You've got to be happy in the action,
Well said.
And as you said,
indeed,
there are so many. Just a Google search leads you down this wonderful, exciting rabbit's warren of possibility that exists in your community. It doesn't take a lot of sniffing to go, oh, I didn't know that group existed. Oh, how cool. I'm going to call them. Hey, I just want to find out what volunteer opportunities. Oh, I'd love to come in. Boom, there you are.
Yeah, actually, it was really amazing. I was at a wedding last week, and I was sitting next to the founder of NorCal Resist and didn't even know it until the wedding was almost over. I was like, wow, this is amazing.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, 4 years ago after Trump won, having always been very political, but not necessarily having done a lot on the political front, because I was always a volunteer for other things, I kind of tried to put myself into the political world. And I found that for me, I was not good at a number of things in that realm. But I moved into working with an organization called the Hollywood Food Coalition. I'm now the president of their board. And I'm working a lot with organizations to try and strengthen the coalition that helps to undergird the social safety net in our city. It's still political. It's just political in a different way. The things that I can do to support candidates, I'm not going to be as good at as some other people are.
No, you're totally right. Don't fit a square peg into a round hole for sure, right? And don't push for candidates you don't believe in, right? Like, I had the epithet of bearded commie in high school, so I can totally be down with somebody with 100 flowers bloom kind of movement idea, right? But I'm not going to push for that in if I was living in Missouri. If I'm in St. Louis, I'm not pushing for that candidate. Pushing for somebody who can win in Missouri, right? Because I care more about building a majority than I care about pushing for an ideologically pure anything, right? So temper your hopes, but still have hope, still have dreams, still push for them. Just kind of have some realism to it. Tuvix is demanding attention at the moment, so apologies.
And I do think that's where, having people who span that spectrum for me, on the progressive side, from people who would be well, I don't know if anybody's to the left of me, but there are people who I admire who are on the left. And I think it's really important that for them, if what animates them is to find an extremely progressive candidate, go find that candidate. There are other people who I think are more inclined either to be moderate or whose nature is to be tactical in a different way, for whom supporting a moderate or even a conservative Democrat might be for them a better fit. Again, let 100 flowers bloom. If you're not going to do anything, if you don't do that, then do that.
I mean, and I'm not disagreeing with any of this. I will say that one of the drawbacks of that is that you do end up with, Joe Manchin.
But if you didn't have Joe Manchin, who would you have? You would have.
Oh yeah, no question. I'm definitely not saying we shouldn't have Joe Manchin. I'm just saying that we also have to figure out how to move the Overton window in such a way, the window of what is considered to be an acceptable political position, to a place where people's hearts and minds change enough that that's not as necessary.
I think that has been the hardest thing about being a Democrat in my lifetime. I'm 61. I go back and I look at what Clinton, all the putting Clinton as Clinton aside, the attempt to do the healthcare reform, that Hillary took over. There are a lot of people who sacrificed their political careers from purplish states that have subsequently turned red. I mean, I remember when Missouri was not a red state. I remember a lot of these states. Iowa was not a red state. I don't want the revolution to eat its own. And I think that's one of the great challenges is I agree with you on the Overton window, but at the same time, I also think it is extremely difficult for us to make these complicated strategic decisions on the ground about the importance of holding on to power and building power simultaneously.
Yeah, no, I mean, none of this is easy. And I think you make an excellent point.
I mean, I like to think that we're all fighting the same fight, and we can disagree on any individual day about the tactical consideration, but I think we all share the same broad strategic goals, and we all want the same ends.
Yeah, but as we've lost Iowas and as we've lost Missouris, we gained Virginias, we might be gaining Georgia, right? Like there are always gives and takes for these things. Ideally, we can just take and not lose anything, but I mean, things aren't quite so simple.
I grew up in an era when there was no question of a Republican House. It was a Democratic House.
Right.
And most of the progressive legislation that emerged from 1945 to, arguably the end of Jimmy Carter's administration came out of Democratic houses that were held by coalitions of Democrats that ran the gamut, but that still were fundamentally interested in. Scoop Jackson you're from Washington State, was a Democratic senator who was to the right of me on foreign policy, but was a progressive when it came to economics. When do you hold your nose? Joe Manchin, I think, to me, it encapsulates the problem. It's like you're not going to get who's going to win. We would not have. Schumer wouldn't be in the chair.
Right.
No, you are 100% right about that. I just and I think to Renzo's point, it's that things do shift, and a lot of it is, frankly, it's whiteness. There's a lot. We're gaining Georgia because Black people in Georgia are building power. Like that's we're losing it in places like where we're holding on to power in places like West Virginia by the skin of our teeth with someone like Joe Manchin. Because there's this tribalism around whiteness that's happening.
Well, and coal. The environment.
And coal.
But yes, but no, I take your point. I know. It's a bear.
And this is the other thing that I want to say is those of us who are listening to this, white people, we got to collect our own. Continue to have those difficult conversations. Just because Donald Trump is out of power doesn't mean we solved racism, and and we really, really, really have to keep pushing that issue among ourselves because we're the ones who have to do the work.
And yeah, John's right. The Democrats controlled the House from 1957 all the way to 1995, right? That's roughly 40 years of Democratic control of it, right? And during that time, even Republicans were further to the left then than they are now. Like Dwight Eisenhower ran on a platform that included adding a national healthcare system in 1950s, right?
We're all Keynesians now.
Right. Nixon tried to create a national healthcare system as well. His was single payer of all things even, right? Like these are people who are now seen as
created the EPA.
Right. And these aren't things you can see a modern Republican doing. Donald Trump wanted to undo the EPA. Right, like these are things have just as Tae was saying, the Overton window has just shifted so far to the right for that party that it's changing the way that we look at all politics, and that's just not healthy.
Well, and I do agree with Tae that I think the thing that we do not have our hands around is with the passage of the Civil Rights Act, Lyndon Johnson said, "Hey, we have given power to the Republican Party for the next couple of generations. The Republicans will essentially follow the Wallace strategy, which Nixon and Lee Atwater did, and they will take all these formerly Democratic states, which the progressive wing of the Democratic Party simply said, we're just going to look the other way when it comes to lynchings and things like that. If we get your votes, we'll give you dams. We'll look the other way." It was a devil's compact.
It was populism for white people.
Yeah.
It was economic liberalism for white people.
Yeah. The history of this country, we have never figured out a way to have an inclusive country ever.
Right.
Yeah.
Even when the left, what we considered the left to be, Rooseveltian left, was not really the left if you were an African American.
I really
on the ground.
I really appreciate the level of back and forth that we've had here, and like my takeaways and listening to you speak and be loquacious about it is like you guys are right. You guys were talking about one issue, and then it was like, well, that issue is also compounded by this issue, which is also compounded by this issue, which goes back to us saying there is no silver bullet. There isn't a silver bullet. Every issue that we're going to encounter is going to have an interrelation of effects, and
I will say
no
this.
one
I don't think
solution.
there's a silver bullet, but this is something that I think historically we have to grapple with. American history is rooted in mobility, and we have lost mobility in this country. From the moment the founders landed on this shore, the pernicious aspect of that was the massacre of American Indians. But the introduction of the railroad, homesteading acts, all sorts of impulses that were basically designed to take the American population and throw it into the air, to people this continent, brought forth all sorts of strange permutations, combinations, and ever-shifting politics. We don't have any kind of national policy that is designed to encourage, I think, a movement of peoples. And I don't know how that changes or if it's feasible, but I think that's one of the things that makes us stagnant right now.
Yeah.
I think one of the things
we're
we
not,
can
we're
agree
not talking
doesn't
to each
help.
other.
One of the things that wouldn't help, though, is somebody like Larry Elder, right? Larry Elder is not going to make that any better. Getting back to slightly the subject.
No.
Yeah.
What I will say is, in terms of, if there are no silver bullets, but the number one practice that has really helped me is, on any issue, listen to the people who are actually the most impacted by it. Like, just seek them out, listen to what they're saying, listen to what they need, and then do that thing. Because they're the experts. They know what they need. And if we all do that for each other, if we're all able to show up for each other in the places where we have privilege and someone else doesn't, that's how we unpick this lock. And so that, that it's not a silver bullet, but it's a practice and it works.
Absolutely.
Oh, one last thing we didn't talk about. Lee Elder, gun control.
Oh, God.
Open carry laws in California.
Wait, I thought...
How would we feel about that?
Didn't Ronald Reagan get rid of that in California back in like 69?
We're just going to see California become Texas if you get Larry Elder. That's basically it.
Yeah.
Well, what would be really, really weird is we almost flipped Texas blue in the last election. It would be really sad if California went red and Texas went blue.
Yeah, the Texas House was, I think,
God.
13,000 votes shy of flipping blue.
Yeah.
Across a few districts, but yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well,
Texas is a blue state. It's just a suppressed state.
Yeah.
We don't
Yeah.
want... That's the thing, is there's blue states, and then there's some red states, and then there's some suppressed states. And we really need to make sure that list of suppressed states gets smaller.
Yeah.
More people voted Democrat in Texas in the last election than voted for Democrats in New York State. That's how many Democrats there are in Texas. Yeah. They're just not represented in anything.
Yeah. I think
I would personally wish that one of the things that, you guys leave whenever you want to. I'll just talk to myself.
Oh, no.
I'm always happy to gab.
This is great.
But I mean, we have not had any kind of a national housing policy or a national economic relocation policy. I mean, there are a lot of smaller cities, that are not cities per se, but that struggle because they lose populations to the big cities. They're not rural, they're not agricultural, they fall in between. To me, one of the things that we could and should do as a country is consider that there are a lot more small regional hub cities that need trains, they need airports, they need schools, they need hospitals, they need to be reinvigorated so that they can become commercial centers in their own rights. So that we think of urbanization not as, how do we help Los Angeles? How do we help New York? We think about urbanizing a country that needs to urbanize further, but do it by looking at the small cities.
John, is this infrastructure week? Is this infrastructure week?
Yeah.
It should be infrastructure week.
Yeah. I mean, trains. If there's any trains and planes, I mean.
Trains.
Yeah.
We need high-speed rail in this country so badly.
Gosh,
yeah.
yes.
And we need airport. We need some the deregulation has kind of kicked our ass. I mean, back before the airports, before the aviation industry was deregulated.
Thanks, Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, you had a level of competition that allowed for small regional airports to continue to exist. Once it became economically unviable and a race to the bottom, you now don't have the ability to live easily in a Wichita if you have to travel. So here we've got this changing world in which people now theoretically could live wherever and work from home and work on Zoom, but we have no transportation infrastructure to support it, so that people could actually feel like, boy, once I'm there, I'm not stuck there for the rest of my life. I want to be able to visit my family. I want them to visit me. Those are the kinds of things that I think they're not silver bullet solutions, but they weave us together. If we're broken as a country, it's because we have chosen to separate, and some of that is geographic.
So that's actually one of the silver linings that has come out of the reporting, essentially from the COVID stories, is cities like Cleveland, like Detroit, like Milwaukee, like St. Paul. A lot of those Rust Belt cities are seeing people return because the people who had moved out to get their educations, to get their fancy jobs on the coast, moved back when they could work remote. And they're staying because most companies seem to be not caring about bringing people back to the office. One of my neighbors here, actually, his office is in Boston, right? And he's just living in the DC suburbs because it's cheaper here for him than living in downtown Boston, right? And this is where he's from, so he's moved back. That could certainly revitalize the population and the economies of places like Cleveland, Detroit, etc. Same thing you could see with places like Wichita or Santa Rosa or Seattle, right?
Yeah, and as somebody, you know.
Oh, Seattle's. People shouldn't move to Seattle.
Yeah, don't move to Seattle.
It's way too expensive. No, please don't.
Seattle suburbs, then.
Yeah,
Suburbs.
Okay,
we want to take people out of Seattle and move them to Casper, Wyoming.
Exactly.
And Akron.
Exactly. Yeah, much as I'd love to sell people on my city, it's getting a little crowded and really expensive.
But Yakima is a case in point.
Oh, Yakima's great.
Yeah,
the Tri-Cities area.
The Tri-Cities area. But that's the thing. It's like as a progressive, and I think for many of us who've lived in cities, I've lived in cities. I'm an actor. I have to live in cities. I've lived in cities my whole life. The nature of city living is that you are thrown against a lot of different people, and you learn, out of necessity to accommodate in a lot of ways and to kind of, grapple with all sorts of different ways of being in the world. Urban areas, I think, take some of those kind of like, fuck you attitudes away from you because you can't live that way in a city. So urbanizing, to me, I think actually feeds the progressive movement. But demographers have shown that too. Like, they've studied this. If they wanted to predict how somebody voted in an election, the best thing to ask is, where do you live? Not where are you from, not who did you vote for last time, not how much money do you make, not your race, color, age, nothing. The best indicator is where you currently live. Yeah.
And people in cities tend to vote blue because they find that they are exposed to more different and varied viewpoints, right? Like, they can't live in an insular life because they're surrounded by people who are different than them, more oppressed in some cases, less oppressed in others, and you learn from that. Exposure makes you more worldly, I guess.
That's if I had a silver bullet, it would be that. It would be like a national policy that actually grows our city infrastructure, because I think it changes the political.
I would add travel to school curriculum. I was one of those like weird privileged kids who, my 8th grade class trip was a month in Indonesia, and literally like just completely exploded my concept of everything that I thought about who people were and how we lived and everything else, and it completely changed how I understood the world. And I think every kid should have that opportunity to travel, to see other places and meet people who don't live exactly the same way we do.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. My 5th grade trip was to DC, and that's where I fell in love with like U.S. government and the concept of like democracy, right? Like going to see like the Capitol building, getting a tour, really instilled in me like the sense of, oh, this is really cool. We can make this better, though.
And bowling, I think we bowling.
Bowling?
Yeah, bowling.
It's a real American pastime.
Travel and bowling, to put your feet into somebody else's stinky shoes.
Oh, okay, got it. Yeah.
Out on the alley with a bunch of people.
We were all way too serious for this joke.
Yeah. Like, wait, what?
No, actually, there is a great book by a guy named Robert Putnam called Bowling Alone.
Yeah, that's right.
And his argument, this is well before the digital age, but he basically said we used to grow up in a network, a web of interrelationships. The expectation is you'd be on the bowling team, the bridge team, the PTA, you'd go to the town council meetings, you go to church, yada, yada. And a community was based on the fact that you all knew each other and you all worked together. That as we atomized and we had more of our life led privately, individual, we watch TV, we're on the internet, yada, 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 that web of connection has fundamentally eroded politics, where politics really lives, which is how do I work with another guy to get along?
Right.
You know, figuring out the dues structure for the bowling league is a political action. Figuring out how the PTA determines what its next event should be and when to hold it is a political action. Politics meaning it's about working out disagreements and coming to actions together. And in that sense, we've lost our political skills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just look at the meetings that we've seen for school boards recently, where parents show up and just yell and scream and rant and QAnon rave, right? Like, they've lost the ability to have this as a rational discussion, and that's not healthy for anyone.
Yeah, which is why I tend to think that finding your voluntaristic bliss and finding some way to plug into an action is political, because it teaches you how to work with other people. It teaches you, as much as I hate you, I'm not going to strangle you because we don't make this work.
Right.
That's a political skill that we've lost, I think, a little bit.
I don't know if I ever had that skill. I want to strangle people a lot.
But you don't. It's not that you don't want to strangle people.
Yes.
We are now living in a country where people seem to actually act on the impulse to strangle people. It's like,
yeah.
I didn't think he would actually hit me, but he did.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is all just really good stuff.
As a reminder, now most California should already have their ballots. Basically, every California should already have their ballots. You should have it in their living room, kind of thing. What you're looking to vote for on this is you vote no on the recall aspect of it and leave the other side of it blank. You don't need to fill it out. You don't need to put a candidate in. You don't want any of them, because they're the only one of them that's got any chance of winning is Larry Elder, and he's a crazy. So don't legitimize it.
Don't worry about writing anything in, because a write-in candidate actually isn't counted unless they're actually already.
So there's only one thing you need to check
Can I ask
mark.
an uninformed question, though, about that? Which is, I mean, so write-in candidates aside, why is Gavin Newsom not on the flip side of that ballot? Why can't you vote no, but if the recall goes through, the person I want is Gavin Newsom?
You can't. So the first question,
why not?
That's the California law for it, right? The California law is, should X be removed from the position of governor? Yes or no? That's the first question. Okay, so if they're removed, who should serve the term cannot be the same person who was just removed. So that's why it must be somebody else from the list. And the Democrats chose not to run anyone.
They're essentially saying they don't want a minority vote to overstrip a majority vote. A majority of people would vote no, so he's out. If you then said he's still available, you could have a minority vote him back in when a majority said they didn't want him in.
Right, so think of it as 51% say not him, but then 49 or 48% of people say him, and that's larger than any other of the subgroups that supported the recall afterwards.
Well, and the part that scares me the most is, 40 or 50% say no, don't or yes, vote him out, and then 22% say vote in Larry Elder. And that means that 78% of the state of California did not vote for someone who is now governor.
Yep. And remember, turnout's what matters on something like this, right? It's easy for people to get complacent. Like we said a bunch of times, Trump is gone. This is off years. Just take and relax. Wait until Nope. No breaks for us. Vigilance is the cost of freedom.
Well,
he's not even gone.
And the thing, voting is a small thing. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, there's really no excuse for not voting. I hate to say it, but it's not like, we had this long, elaborate conversation about, could do this, could do that, could do this. Bottom line is a simple thing, and as a mail-in, we are luxuriating as California, as far as I'm concerned, in a country that is attempting to strip away the possibility of voting by mail. One of the things, we should enjoy this luxury. We can vote by mail. We don't have to go stand in a line. Drop it in the mailbox, and it's only one check. It's only one check. It's on your name.
Easy.
So easy. It's also, you don't have to put a stamp on it. It's prepaid.
It is faster to do than to describe how to do it.
And as a reminder, a big part of the reason why every Californian can now vote by mail like this is because of Gavin Newsom's efforts to make it that way, right? He made voting more convenient and easier for all of you. Take advantage of it, and then save them from getting removed.
Yes, thank you. That is a great thing to point out. That's the struggle going on in this country. In blue states, blue legislatures and blue governors are trying very hard to encourage people to vote and to make it easier for people to vote. And red states are trying to make it harder for people to vote. In what world is that?
A world where you're afraid of your own voters.
Which side do you want to be on?
Right.
Yeah.
Now, as a reminder, no political campaign has paid any of us for our opinions here. These are just our own thoughts, our own words. You can't sue us for it. Nobody's sponsoring us.
I'm not getting paid. I'm not getting paid. I'm not getting paid.
John, I'll send you.
Sorry.
I'll send you a pen.
No notes.
You know what? Just go ask George Soros for your check. That's what I always
That's
do.
true. That's true.
Frame of bowling. How about if we all went bowling together?
Dude, I will definitely go bowling with you.
You guys pick
I'd
up
take
the
you.
first frame.
I'll pick up the check.
I'll take you bowling anytime.
Excellent. Okay, so let's all make a date to go bowling at some point in time, thus feeding and nourishing the body politic.
Yeah. We can figure out.
Understood. Yes, let's do it.
All right, excellent. Great.
Well, everybody, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do this so quickly. Just a reminder for the listeners, this election is Tuesday, September 14th, 2021. In whatever proximity you're listening to this, please, bare minimum, vote.
And what time does the ballot have to be in? What time does
the
polls
mail-in
close?
ballot? The mail-in ballot can be still mailed the day of the election, and the polls close in the text box that will accompany this post when I post this on YouTube.
And you can Google
Yay!
drop boxes for a vote near me, and there's a good chance you'll find a drop box not too far away from you.
Absolutely.
Something else the Republicans want to take away from the rest of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And if anybody really wants a justification for why we're talking about this on a Star Trek podcast, think of it this way: if you vote for if Larry Elder becomes governor, we'll get the Bell riots a couple years early.
Oh,
Yep.
Wow.
I see.
Yep.
I don't watch enough Star Trek. That went completely over my
I'm
head.
gonna have
Fair enough,
to.
John.
You know, John, it might actually be fun to watch Past Tense Part 1 and 2 with you to see what you have to say about that.
Really?
I
Okay.
would
set in San
love
Francisco.
that.
Yeah. If there's no denobulin in it, I just fast forward. It's like no denobulin.
You know, we had a denobulin in our Star Trek Online game, and you didn't show
Did you?
up. I'm very sad.
You didn't show up.
You didn't show up.
I didn't show up. I was invited.
Yeah, no. Star Trek Lower Decks had a pair of Denobulans being chased by some evil creature called a Mugatu, and yeah, that was a little cameo for the Denobulans.
Yep, they're still around. We love them.
Yeah.
The Denobulans introduced me to polyamory, so there you go.
That's what I tell people all the time. First polyamorous Star Trek character.
Star Trek alien, yeah, no, it's great.
Oh, this has been very, very great.
All right.
Thank you
All
all.
right. Smooches to you guys.
I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Stephanie Baker, S. Tam, Anne Marie, and Jim Cook for being our Patreon and Anchor supporters. We really appreciate your involvement with the podcast. Thank you so much.
We are Beyond Trek Podcast. Lower your inhibitions and surrender your years. We will add inspirational and hilarious Trek content to your day. Your attention will adapt to subscribe to us. Resistance is futile.